Welcome to Working Dogs and Whiskey. Join Sean White and Jonathan Moses as they pour a glass and dive into insightful and fun conversations about dogs in all their incredible roles. So grab your favorite drink and let's raise a glass to great stories, laughs, and a whole lot of dog talk.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey. I'm Sean White, and I'm sitting here with my friend, co-host Jonathan Moses. Dude, are you ready?
Yep, ready to roll.
So before we get rolling, right now it is what, 12:15 your time?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's 12 a.m. I'm joining John in his little transition to night shift, so
yeah.
we're recording late.
I'm ready
So
today.
he's ready. I've been up all day, so I'm not. So
Yeah, yesterday was rough.
what happened yesterday?
So I tried to, I woke up at my normal time, like 5, 6 o'clock. It's like my normal time on an off day. So I woke up and I just stayed up as late as I could, which was like 9:15. It started to hit me really hard. So I made it till 12, but I was dying. But that helped me sleep in longer today, and now that I slept in, I feel better staying up. So I feel a lot better for this episode. Yesterday would have been a shit show.
Yeah, well, I'm glad one of us feels better. I'm dying right now. I'm actually drinking coffee at, I'm an hour behind, so it's 11 o'clock my time.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's fine. I gotta be up. I have a client to work with tomorrow.
Yeah, I was sleeping until like 11.
Must be nice.
Speaking of coffee, do you have a Quick Trips down there? I know you know what Quick Trip is, but
Yeah, for people that don't, it's a brand of gas station. But yeah, we do.
all right. They got cold brew coffee on tap,
Mm-hmm.
and they have the skinny vanilla latte cold brews. It has been like my go-to for the last 3 weeks.
Okay.
Even on my off day, I have to go get a cup now.
Really?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. I'll have to try it because I've seen it, but I've never had anybody to validate it, and I'm not one of those to experiment with too much, so I don't go too far out.
I made that mistake today. We went to Chili's for dinner, and I knew the crispy chicken sandwich there is probably like one of the best chicken sandwiches I've had. But they had a barbecue platter where you could get like chipotle honey chicken tenders, ribs, fries, bread, and what else did it come with? Oh, I got the smoked jalapeno sausage, and I was like, man, the picture looks really good, but why deviate? I let Lillian make the decision. I got the barbecue platter. It wasn't bad. It was like a 7 out of 10, but I could have got a 9 out of 10 chicken sandwich. So I was like, damn, this is why I don't change from the norm. Could have been guaranteed greatness, and instead I got mediocrity, but whatever.
Sometimes you gotta roll the dice, you know.
Yeah. If I want some like average barbecue, I guess I'll go there next time.
Separate note, aside from food, we're gonna do it now. We're gonna talk about where we're at as far as the podcast. So we're doing pretty well in certain terms, but I figured out the importance of getting people to follow and share and 5-star reviews. So it actually expands our podcast on Spotify. So it'll show up more. So if you're listening right now, you made it this far, do your due diligence because we are up to 70 something followers, I believe.
Yeah.
As of tonight. And we only have 7 reviews. So it takes less than a minute. Just scroll to the top, hit the review, hit 5 stars. If you're going to do anything less, then don't worry about it.
A buddy of mine's working. He's working on some stuff at his house right now. I know he's listening to an episode right now. He's texting me about it. I'm about to tell him like, "Hey, leave that review."
Yeah, just leave a review.
Yeah,
it's not hard. Leave a review. Help us out. But no, it does actually help so that we can produce a better quality show. So eventually,
good catch doing it at the beginning of the episode this time too.
Well, I'm trying things out. I haven't figured out like how to get people to do it, so it's an ongoing project. But I figured if I do it at the beginning, then maybe people will actually act on it.
Because usually it's what, like the last 30 seconds we like remember. I never remember. You always say it. That's like the last 30 seconds of the show.
Yeah, and everybody's probably like done listening. They're like, oh, they're talking about bullshit again. They're done with the dogs. But yeah, no, it's all strategized, to get a reaction, which is the topic for our today's podcast.
Nice segue.
Nice segue. Yeah.
I'm glad you do like the first few minutes to get us into the topic. I just kind of wait here and like wait for the segue. I'm like, oh, there it is, ready to roll.
Which is ironic because I'm not the one that usually does a lot of the talking and stuff. But I try. So
you're killing it, man.
Yeah, we'll see. I appreciate it. I'll take the compliment.
Yeah.
But no, so one of the things that prompted me to think about reactivity and stuff like that is I'm currently wrapping up a 3-week board and train with a reactive little miniature schnauzer. Just nothing crazy. I don't think he's bitten anybody yet, but definitely has some strong feelings about people and dogs and stuff like that. For such a little guy, and it's kind of comedic in some ways, but then it prompted me to think, like, this lady has been dealing with this for 2 years, and it's got to be a nightmare, to take her dog out. Like, I mean, for example, and I'll probably bring it up again later on the podcast, but just little things going to like Tractor Supply, which is basically it encompasses a lot of things for dogs, agriculture, yard work, all that good stuff, and embodies everything. And I asked her, do you mind if I take the dog and give it a bath at Tractor Supply? And she was like, I would love that. The last time I went to Tractor Supply, we made it to the front door and then she had to leave because the dog's reactivity was so bad. And I'm like, wow. So, and it's not to bash anybody, but it's one of the things that we haven't talked about yet. And I know you have a lot more experience than I do, because it seems to be a little bit more prevalent in the pet industry than I would see military working dogs. And I'm assuming more so on the police side. I haven't seen it as prevalent. It's still there for sure. And we can talk about that going into the podcast on why, because basically we have a criteria for selection. So the procurement process kind of mitigates some of the reactivity that we would see, vice somebody picking their dog up off the street not off the street, but from a breeder, adopting a dog. Street. Yeah, I was going to say, if you adopt a dog, potentially coming from the street. So, and with that just comes unknown baggage. You unlock Pandora's box the moment you take the dog home, and you just figure out what you got. But it's definitely something I think we should talk about on all platforms between pets and working dogs, and let's see where it takes us.
Okay. Well, you hit on something just in that first sentence you said. You said it's a mini schnauzer with strong feelings towards people. And reactivity is kind of a blanket term, right? Like, your dog can be reactive towards a lot of things, or any dog. Cars, people, loud noises, other dogs, screwdrivers. Like, it could be anything. And this dog could display reactivity towards it. And for me, I've kind of broken it down into 3 categories where I feel like reactivity kind of stems from. And it's usually some kind of insecurity. So when I see a dog who gets really defensive, starts barking at people in like a deep guttural kind of way, puts on like this big display, and there's an air of serious, like a very serious kind of intent behind it. Usually, to me, that is some level of insecurity. That's one way I see it kind of develop, or what it stems from. Another way is it's stimulus driven. Like, sometimes it's just prey and movement, and a dog can react to those things. And that can kind of display itself as what we would call reactivity or frustration. which is just like a series of events over and over. The dog kind of learns, becomes frustrated, recognizes a pattern, and then doesn't know how to handle it. And those are, I feel like that's what we kind of, as reactivity, like those three things. And they all kind of display themselves very similarly, but the root of the issue is very different across those three things too. I feel like with some of the insecurities and the stimulus or prey drive, that's more of a genetic component kind of showing its ugly head at certain times or just unwanted times that we're not sure how to control or how to mold them into like urban lifestyles. Whereas frustration, I feel like, is more kind of taught. Like it's something that's learned and developed over time. The dog kind of recognizes a pattern or a series of actions, and then it just kind of goes from there. But as soon as you said strong feelings, that kind of leads me to believe he's got some insecurities about people, maybe, where he's just uncertain. So maybe he's at the end of the leash. That's usually what reactivity ends up displaying itself as. Like I said, the signs of it usually look the same. End of the leash, barking, pulling, something like that is usually when trainers go, "Yo, yeah, your dog's reactive." Okay, well, in what way? What does it stem from? But usually dogs at the end of the leash, barking, showing its teeth, barking, growling, some combination of those things, tail wagging, good, bad, however you want to interpret that. It's just stimulus, right? But that's how I kind of look at reactivity or break reactivity down. What are your thoughts on that? Like what reactivity means to you?
So for me, very similar in definition as far as I do believe that reactivity is kind of a thrown out term that we use to embody a lot of different behaviors that we see from dogs. But for me, I'm going to kind of circle back to how I define it, but I always look for what caused it, because usually the big event that you see is not usually what it was, the display of reactivity. So, and I'll give a quick story. I've told you the story probably hundreds of times now about the one reactive dog that we had in the kennels. We have different tags for the dogs. Majority of them are what we call clear tags, and they're just your average military working dog in training, right? Then we have a green tag for some of the ones that have specific issues that we've identified that'll cause a reaction, whether it's gear, you can't pat them a certain way, or some type of trigger, known trigger. And then you have, lastly, what we would classify as a red tag, where the dog may have a specific trigger, but the reaction is very severe. So, like, the dog will attack you or somebody else, whatever the case. So, a couple of years back, probably in 2018, we had a dog, Nico, he ended up being a red tag dog, like a very serious offender. And I remember we were working with him and everything, and one of the guys that knew the dog when he first got to Lackland was like, "Really, Nico is a red tag?" And he was very thrown off by it. And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "No, when he came here, he was like one of the sweetest dogs that got here." And I was like, "So then what happened?" And so we sat down and we really dissected it. Like, why is he so reactive to other people when you're going to put him in the kennel? And apparently, I won't go through all the steps because it's kind of a lengthy story, but essentially what happened was they would place him in the kennel, the caretaker would go in to go flip his bucket to put water in it, and when they would go out, the dog would jump on him. And they'd pet him, and then kind of just set him down and walk out the kennel. Well, then one day the dog Nico jumped on a lady, and then kind of as she was walking out, just snapped at her like a little peck or whatever, and she stopped, turned around, pushed him back. And so eventually there was an approximation where it led to, just from the dog jumping to biting to, now I'd figured out that if I use my mouth, it'll at least get them to stay for a moment, right? And so after a while, it became severe to the point where he actually bit the lady's calf off, or part of her calf off. And then it just turned into the big event that we knew him for when he entered training. The reason I bring up that story is that it started as something minuscule. Him jumping on the caretaker, he's found some type of reinforcement, right? Even if it was for a brief moment, it held her in there for a little bit more, a little bit longer. and it kind of fed his little peck desire and all that good stuff, right? And I think that's the case in most reactivity. It starts as something minuscule, unless it's genetic based, where the dog is just predisposed to being that way. It's usually a trained, thing, and which kind of gives light or hope in the training process, because if it's something that's been trained into the dog, there's a good chance that it could be trained out of the dog. But in his particular case, it started as something minuscule, graduated into this big event, and now we have a strong reaction when we're going to put him in and out of kennels and things like that. And I think that's the basis of most reactivity. And we have to remember that just because a dog is quote unquote aggressive, for lack of better words, or displays some level of aggression, it's also a level of reinforcement. And I think we spoke about it a few episodes back when we were talking about Mona, is that the reactivity does produce some type of reinforcement for the dog, or it did at some point. And then whether it made somebody go away or kept somebody, in Nico's case, kept them around, something happened where the dog found fulfillment in their reactivity. And so we have to understand that part of it to be able to diagnose the accurate prescription or training program that would suit the dog best.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. Like I said, you need to know what the root cause of the issue is to figure out how to go about it. So for a dog, in pet cases, I'd say the most common thing you see is a dog who gets really aroused when sees other dogs. So if it's a dog who maybe as a puppy was allowed to run up to other dogs, run up to other puppies for a while, and they allowed that interaction to happen, but maybe when your dog was 4 months old, he was cute. Everyone loved when he would approach and be excited to come like that. So they allowed that greeting to happen. And the dog was like, okay, I enjoy this, right? But maybe you had a 3-month-old Corso who, by the time he's 10 months or a year and a half, all of a sudden him pulling and barking to get over to that other dog owner isn't as cute. They don't want that to happen, right? So that dog starts pulling and going, and people start walking away with their dogs. He starts to become frustrated. He just wants to get over there. He's aroused. There's stimulus, right? He's like, hey, I want to get over there. There's movement. There's excitement. I know I was allowed to play, right? That's going to be a very different fix. I know one thing I saw you do when we were training at the kennel for dogs that had that issue, you would teach them to be calm, walk in a hill, and then let them go sniff other dogs. Really easy, simple fix. You just showed that dog how to get access to what he wanted. But something that would look very similar is if you took another dog who maybe had insecurities about other dogs. So it sees another dog walking by and it says, okay, I'm going to bark, growl, hit the end of the leash to try and create some distance. Because again, let's say it's another Corso, same age, it's pulling, and people say, oh, no, that's not as cute as when it was a puppy, and they start going away. Well, that dog also successfully created distance. One dog wanted access to the dogs, the other one wanted to create distance. We're going to treat those things very differently. So the process might not be, hey, do what I want and you can go over there, but it may be, hey, stick with me, ignore that. We're going to work through it, right? We're going to build some confidence around other dogs. I'm not going to allow other dogs to enter your space sometimes. Sometimes it's dogs that have been attacked on leash. So now they're trying to put up that front. They're trying to make themselves known prior to that confrontation happening. So with that dog, I may say, hey, stick in this hill and stick with me, and I won't allow anything to happen. We'll move right through and nothing bad is going to happen. As opposed to the excited dog who wants to get over there, maybe stick with me and there's the possibility that I'll let you go play. So knowing the root cause of the issue is going to drastically change how we do these things. But to an untrained person or the untrained eye, those two behaviors will look very similar. A lot of people show up and say, well, my dog's reactive. And I say, okay, what does that look like? Can you tell me more about it? And usually I have to pull a dog out or I try and see it firsthand, what their reactivity looks like. And there's differences in how the dog responds that gives you more insight into where this issue is probably stemming from. Sometimes owners can tell you, like, hey, he got attacked on a walk back at this time, and then this has been happening ever since. Owner has some information, that's great. Sometimes it's a genetic issue where that dog just naturally doesn't want to be around other dogs, doesn't like being near other dogs, doesn't trust them, right? Or maybe it wasn't exposed to it. You have to be able to diagnose those things and know what the difference in body language, barking, all of that looks like to say, okay, this dog means no harm. It just wants to get over there. This one is trying to create distance. And I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to talk about, well, two parts. One, as since we're already on the subject of like triggers and things that go into play with reactivity, I think a common one in the pet, and really honestly in the pet, military, working dog, and police, when you have a dog that's reactive to either people or a situation or other dogs, whatever it is that it displays reactivity, I think a big thing to look at is understanding your reaction prior to the event as the person on leash. So like, I know you have probably flooded with a lot of stories and memories, but one of the things I see, and it's more common with pet owners, but it's even after their dog has been trained and you send them videos, hey, the dog's fine at a park, it's good at, and all these other environments that they were afraid to take their dog in, and you still see, when they're another dog down the road that could be 30, 40 meters down the road, and the owner sees them and they start tensing up on the leash. Well, that information is telling the dog we should be worried about something. Something's about to happen. And so we trigger anxiety, within the dog. And it's very humanistic. I would do the same thing. I've done the same thing in the past. And I've seen it with handlers and pet owners alike. And, it's one of those things that as a trainer or somebody that's supervising that, you have to address those things. Like, dude, relax, have slack in the leash. And if the dog chooses to make a mistake, then we have the tools and we have the communication installed in the dog to correct that or to leverage it, right, in the way that we would want the desired outcome to be. But you excuse me, have to let the dog make the decision in that situation. What are your thoughts about that?
So I think one of the big things you just hit on was allowing the dog the opportunity to make the mistake. So we've gone through the process of teaching these behaviors, generalizing them, improving them, either in a board and train, through lessons, however we got there, right? A lot of people will avoid difficult areas with their dogs. So I cannot tell you the number of people who sent their dog off for training because it had dog reactivity issues walking around the neighborhood, right? Dog goes home. We worked on those issues a ton, but then they go out of their way to avoid every dog. Like they're like, I know that yard has dogs on the fence that run up and bark all the time. I'll take a block over. Like you said, they see that dog a block away and they're like, we'll turn left. No, find those problem areas and work on them. Like your dog either makes the mistake or he doesn't, but you have to allow him the choice. Exactly what we talked about last week. Learning occurs through failure, right? We have to set the dog up. It's not even a setup. We just have to give him the opportunity. You either do the right thing or the wrong thing, but the plan and the tools are in place to correct or rectify whatever we're doing or reward the right behavior. But it's one of those things where if we don't practice it, if this has been an ongoing issue, like you said, that Schnauzer's been doing this for what, 2 years? The mini Schnauzer? So he's been having the reactivity issues with people for the last 2 years. You got him for a 3-week board and train, doing great with him. He's working through his people issues. You're giving him the opportunity to make a mistake, and he's learning from it. If he were to go back and his owners avoided people at all costs, and then they occasionally stumbled across people, he's going to default to whatever he's got the most repetitions in, right? Or whatever he started out doing. You can't avoid that stuff. You have to go through it. I need to get 2 years going past as many people as possible, is how I would look at it. He had 2 years to develop this habit. We're going to take 2 years to try and fix this and make sure it becomes second nature, right? So you want to put yourself in those situations. And then the reactions prior to are, it's huge. It's huge in everything. We did it with Crash, working him. We knew he had some secondary issues and control issues when he came down back in last December. What happens prior to is a big deal. We knew we were going to do bite work. We knew he immediately gets keyed up. He blows his load. He gets worked up. Okay. Then we said, hey, prior to, we're going to get him out. We're going to walk him around. We'll do a little bit of obedience. We're going to let him unwind and walk into the situation. Back tie him, reward him, take him off, put him back on, do a little bit of obedience, bring you out at a distance, start working some of that stuff. And we did all the prep work. We showed him, hey, you're going to come out and listen. We put him in the right state of mind prior to. Setting up things before is huge. It really is. It doesn't matter if it's pet dogs. It doesn't matter if it's working dogs. Have some kind of routine or kind of break up getting from point A to point B. Dogs are very pattern oriented. So if we always kind of just jump right into the deep end, or we don't set things up prior to, or think about what our reaction is going to be going to that event, it kind of sets them up to fail sometimes, especially if they already kind of have pre-established behaviors or patterns. I always tell people if the dog's gone, if you're going to let the dog make the decisions, most of the time they're going to make the wrong one. Like, it's just not conducive to what we're trying to do usually. I've got one dog who makes the right decision like 90% of the time. He's a Tibetan Mastiff. Most of the time he's just asleep. He's lazy. He doesn't really do much. Like, that's kind of the right decision most of the time. Just kind of chill and hang out. Especially with the working dogs, they're so driven that they are going to make the wrong decision. Out of the pet dogs, you see some insecurities. Again, wrong decision. We want to set them up, kind of establish what we're doing prior to. That we can stay relaxed, so we can set up that scenario or that moment to give them the opportunity and say, hey, I'm not worried about it. What are you going to do? Are you going to default to this level of training or kind of go back to what you used to do? And we can correct from there and move on. But I think it really applies across the board, no matter what you're looking at training wise. Doesn't matter if it's a pet dog, police dog, military working dog, whatever. The steps prior to and allowing the dog the opportunity to make the mistake are probably more important than the actual moment itself.
Yeah, and going into the second part of what I wanted to talk about as far as when to reinforce your dog. So, and let me kind of paint the scene on that, because it'll somewhat contradict what that last statement that you just said.
Yeah.
So the way that I look at it, essentially, just putting in simplistic terms, there's two time periods where you could reward the dog. There's before the reaction, and then you could go for after the reaction. And we'll kind of dive into the pros and cons of each. And it depends on the severity, intensity, things of that, all things considered, on which route I'm going to take. But I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll just go over what those look like. So, like, let's just go for the typical one, usually barking in some levels, whether it's a pet dog reacting to another dog, military working dog, maybe a gunfire, it barks, police dog, maybe the setup, it knows it's about to do a building search, it's about to go find somebody, so it's barking, and it's like, dude, we're in the stack with SWAT, could you please shut the hell up for a minute? All those situations are centered around arousal and barking, right? So that's the target behavior that we want to kind of reduce the likelihood of. Now, the question is, one, this goes without saying, but let's talk about reinforcers, right? So if we're going to go with positive reinforcement, let's say we want to kind of use positive reinforcement to break the dog of that reactivity. Whether you wanted to use positive or really negative reinforcement, it has to be congruent with the motivation to react. And what I mean by that is that it has to exceed the dog's motivation to react. So if I say, hey, I want to use the dog's kibble in order to get him to calm down and relax, well, his food may not exceed his motivation to react to whatever it is that he's reacting to. So it's not a suitable reinforcer, obviously. Well, and same thing for negative reinforcement. If we say, oh, I'm just going to use a choke chain, maybe that's not enough to deter the dog from reacting, or to put the dog into an alternative behavior and say, hey, this is something you should be more in tune with, vice reacting to whatever it is, whatever the stimulus is that causes the reactivity. So first we would have to find a suitable reinforcer, whether positive or negative, that actually will alter the dog's mind, essentially. Secondly, now when do we impose those reinforcers? Before or after? I've done it both ways. I think some of the pros for me, we'll talk about before we go into the after. So if I reward my dog before the event happens, a few of the pros that I see is, one, we can get the dog's attention. And I think that's probably the next key component in curing reactivity is I want my dog's attention for the most part in most settings. And if I can have his undivided attention despite the different distractions and everything or whatever it reacts to, then I can manipulate the dog's behavior. I can mold that into something else and say, hey, every time you see this one thing that you would normally react to, it's actually a sign for positive reinforcement, right? And that's usually constructed through rewarding before the dog has a chance to react. And with that, just on a quick segue or a quick tangent, like when I get dogs that do have reactivity issues, I try to stay away from allowing them to have that opportunity to react if possible. Just because I believe most of my clients, when they say the dog reacts to something, and there's no need for them to really practice that behavior. And that's just another pro into rewarding before the reactivity happens, is that the dog doesn't get a real chance to actually do the undesired behavior, if you will. And then lastly, you get a chance to mold that into it. Once you have the dog's attention, usually they'll see the thing that they react to and they'll look up to you for reinforcement. Now I have his attention. I can shape that into, okay, we can approximate into this is now sit, down, or heel, or some type of alternative behavior. And we can get something going in that aspect, in that capacity, where we can get the dog to not react as much or not react at all and in the presence of that stimulus. So what do you have as far as rewarding before?
So for rewarding before, you already hit on it, but just changing the pattern. So I think there's nothing wrong with reconditioning what that cue for whatever that reaction was means to the dog. So like you said, they see the dog and I may start teaching you, hey, look to me for the next step, right? Whether it's heel, reinforcement, whatever it is. And you kind of build that into whatever behavior I need the dog to go into. So with a lot of pet dogs, right? I may start a dog at a distance and they see that dog. They look away from that dog. They look at me, click reward, click reward, click reward, right? When they actively choose to look from that dog and look my direction. So I start rewarding prior to, or kind of start prepping the dog for, hey, if you see a dog on a walk, this is what could be beneficial to you, right? And start changing what that could mean for that dog. So maybe it looks at that dog, I click, it looks back at me, I reward it, right? And I start reconditioning what that stimulus looks like. Again, with bite work, maybe that dog won't. I was just doing it with Crash last week. He's got a tough time taking toys in the presence of a decoy, like a lot of dogs do. So I had the decoy back up at a distance, had him on the table. I pulled his ball out and I told him yes. And like most dogs, he looked at me. He's like, fuck you, fuck that toy, get it out of my face. He's right there. Like, I'm trying to get to the big ticket item. And I said, no. I told him to lay down. He's waiting for a reinforcer. He looks at him. I mark it with the marker for his toy. He bites the toy. And then I tell him he can go get the bite on that decoy. So you start changing the pattern. Like usually he would focus and fixate on that decoy. Now I need you to be receptive. If this dog locks in on other dogs while we're on a walk, then I want to start conditioning you to look at me for direction when you see dogs on other walks. I think rewarding before is kind of a prerequisite for curing a lot of reactivity. You want to have that down pat in your training phase. Like you should be working on that. You should be kind of reconditioning that stimulus. And then you want to start to set that up in different scenarios as you go. And then ultimately you layer in some kind of punishment into that. But rewarding before is a huge part. It's the first step, honestly.
Yeah. So, and exactly what you said, having a condition reinforcer is going to be critical in that situation. So, and I want to construct that outside of the reactivity, somewhere sterile, somewhere where I can tell my dog yes, or whatever my terminal marker is, and the dog is without hesitation will come flying back to me for the reinforcement, because that's how your cure is going to look once you go to do the work to bring the dog out of reactivity, or to suggest to the dog that it doesn't need to even react to that. Then we've talked about the pros of rewarding before the reactivity. One of the things I want to talk about is like some of the drawbacks, because I feel like a lot of podcasts or things I listen to, seminars that I've been to, we talk about the benefits of training in a certain style or a certain methodology, and we don't spend a lot of time speaking about the drawbacks or the fallouts that can happen, in which we all know as dog trainers and dog enthusiasts, no method is perfectly balanced. You're going to cure everything in one shot. For everything that you gain, you're going to lose something on that end, or potential to lose something at a minimum, right? So one of the thoughts I have on rewarding before the reactivity is that if your timing isn't good, just like most things in dog training, and you don't approximate soon enough, the dog becomes dependent on the reinforcer being there, which means essentially the dog will see the thing that it would normally react to, look to you, and if you don't have that reinforcer present, especially if it's a visual cue like a toy in your hand or something of that effect, then and you try to just ditch it cold turkey, and the dog says, "Oh, you have nothing," it goes back to the thing that it's accustomed to doing for reinforcement, which is the reactivity. So that's one of the things that I would look out for. That's probably the biggest fallout I see with that method when it falls apart, is that we do too many reps and the dog is now dependent on the reinforcer being present in the situation. Otherwise, it's just going to carry out its normal reactivity. So what about for you, John? What do you have as far as cons?
I would say one of the fallouts. It's good to fade a lot of stuff out, but it seems like after training or after we kind of see a behavior's been fixed for a while or it's been going good for a while, variable reward is important, but I feel like people stop rewarding altogether. So they go through, the dog's pretty consistent, and maybe it can walk past 10 decoys and not have a problem, or walk by 10 other dogs and be just fine. But over a period of time, the dog says, "Hey, I don't get rewarded for this behavior anymore." And you'll see the dog kind of start to revert back to what it did previously because it's kind of got some built up frustration. Sometimes behavior can become worse because as people, we tend to say, "Oh, hey, we fixed it, it's done," and we stop rewarding for it. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a good catch, because you definitely have to implement a variable reinforcement schedule or intermittent reinforcement schedule as you go along, if that's the avenue of approach that we're going to take. Now let's move on to, if we choose to do what I think is more of an unorthodox method of training, but rewarding after the reactivity. So I know one dog in particular you and I worked on, and we were kind of experimenting or working with that thought process. And it was a dog that was reactive, I believe, to people, and we had him at the front of the facility, and people were sporadically walking in and out, and the dog would just bark at people at the end of the leash. And we were just waiting, but again, both sides, however you do it, you have to have that conditioned reinforcer. That marker's well ingrained into the dog and conditioned into the dog, which that dog did. And as soon as the dog gave up, barking or the reactivity, you clicked and rewarded it. And I think we were there for about 2 or 3 minutes of the dog doing that, barking. And then the next go around, it de-escalated down to 1 minute, then 30 seconds or something of that nature, down to seconds. And then we had no reactivity. It was identical to rewarding prior to the trigger. And we had the same result. The dog saw a person and looked at you like, "Hey, come on." Now we have some Pavlovian conditioning being brought into that, where the dog sees the stimulus and expects reward from you, and is now looking to you for information. And so for the pros for that, I mean, rewarding after, you kind of set the stage for negative punishment. All the barking that the dog did, the stimulus never left, which would be the person in that scenario. And so it didn't benefit the dog. all the barking didn't produce anything. When it finally was quiet and displayed the desired behavior or the target behavior that we wanted, then it was reinforced. And so that's how we essentially got to the part where we wanted, where the dog would see somebody and look to you for reinforcement. And I think that's, in a nutshell, it's very identical to rewarding prior to the reactivity. But on the same token, it just takes more patience and less involvement, which is extremely frustrating on the handling end of the leash, because you're just sitting there watching the dog do quote unquote the wrong thing, and you're just waiting for a moment to take a snapshot in the dog's head. And so, what are your thoughts?
So usually, and I'm not saying this is the right way, but this is kind of how I pick which method I'm going to go with when it comes to training that specific behavior, whether I'm going to reward before or after. So usually if I'm rewarding a dog before, it's kind of where we're working with some of those insecurities that we talked about. So if a dog is nervous, unsure what to do, then that's where typically I would reward the dog beforehand. So I would condition the dog prior to, get the dog focused on me instead of the stimulus, try and lower some of that stress, get its mind onto something else. But a lot of times when I find myself rewarding the dog after is when the dog is, yeah. So the biggest difference for me rewarding before or after, I think typically with dogs I reward before, it's usually when they have some kind of insecurity. And for myself, when dogs are usually stimulus driven, prey driven, like something is, the dog's just excitable, is what most people recognize it as. I tend to reward the dog afterwards, typically because they want something, right? You remember Rain, that German Shepherd, had gotten loose, attacked that other dog, actually killed another dog, a little small dog. Terrible dog reactivity, but it was just prey driven. Like all of it was just went back to prey drive. The dog was very excitable to go chase other dogs. So ultimately what we ended up doing with that dog was she would bark at other dogs. She would go towards other dogs. We never allowed her to get all the way there, but would reward when she would stop for a second. I'd pull out a ball, mark it, reward, and we just kind of went about it like that. So whenever that moment or that pause is there, she would come back, bite the ball, and then that's how she kind of got that outlet. So as we did that more and more, she started to say, hey, barking at these other dogs isn't worth it. And we kind of built up that duration where she said, you know what, I'd rather interact with you or look to get that reward from you. And her dog activity just kind of went away. She said, this isn't a beneficial behavior. I can have another outlet for this. Now she's in the home with a small dog with no issues. Before, if she was anywhere near a dog, they were concerned she was going to kill it. So typically for me, if I'm rewarding after, it's because the dog wants something from me. And I can kind of build on that moment of silence, or I can turn that into a behavior that's beneficial for me. As to oppose when I'm rewarding before, it's usually because the dog is very nervous or insecure. And I'm trying to build some hope prior to that, hey, there is something in this for you. That's kind of the biggest difference for me.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I like the part that you said where the dog Rain, the one that you just described, where she's actually living with another dog, and that's probably something that the owners themselves probably didn't think was feasible. But I think a lot of that kind of derives, it's a byproduct of rewarding after, where the dog feels a little bit more empowered that it's controlling its outcome, if that makes sense. Because yes, there are some elements of classical conditioning. Of course, that's always everything goes back to some level of classical conditioning. But I think a lot of it is more of an operant thing where the dog has experienced different types of behaviors and things like that, and then only one of which produces that reward. But I do like the way that you framed it as far as your standard measurement on which approach you're going to take as far as rewarding before or after the reactivity. If a dog, like you had mentioned earlier, just to reiterate, if a dog has some type of prey drive, or some people may call it play, if you will, where it'll interact with an item, a ball, a toy, or something like that, way easier to manipulate that than just doing the transaction with food. Maybe we can get some luring and things like that. But I think tapping into their prey drive, their ability to want to chase and do things like that and make it more interactive. I think that's what we were talking about earlier when I mentioned your reinforcer has to exceed the motivation for the dog's reactivity. So if you're able to leverage that over a dog, I think it will just produce a greater outcome in the end. But it does take a lot of repetition, a lot of patience, and definitely timing has to be there. One of the other things that, or I'm sorry, did you have something?
Well, actually, while we're talking about it, the steps prior to. So, like you said, it does take a lot of work before we get to that point. There was probably 3 days of me and you sitting in the back of the facility, just teaching her how to play with the ball.
That's
We
right.
were
Yeah.
patting it on the ground, getting her to pick it up, tapping it. Like we had to teach her how to play it. It wasn't just innate. And I think because people don't see a lot of results or immediate results with it right away, they kind of give up on that. But we spent days just using some leash pressure, some opposition reflex, getting her to want to come and play with the ball and interact that way and showing her a different way to kind of satiate that same drive and then just giving her no other option on that. So I think that's a big part. As you were saying, I kind of remembered the prerequisites that we did going into it, but that's a good point.
Yeah. No, that's actually worth talking about. I mean, there, like you said, a dog that shows a little ounce of prey drive, because it wasn't much that she showed us
Yeah.
that she was interested in the ball, but you even brought it to light. You were saying, her whole thing is prey driven, like the reactivity in and of itself. If we could redirect that, channel it into what you and I know is play, we're rechanneling her natural prey drive into something, an item that we think is acceptable in society. So instead of chasing after another dog, we say, hey, redirect that into a ball. But I'm glad you brought up the fact that we didn't abort it just off rip, because the first few times we brought a ball out, she didn't show us the end result. She showed us enough to continue on for a couple of days. And the other part that's worth mentioning is, again, we did this without any other dogs present,
Yep.
any other, other stimulus. I think her biggest obstacle at one point was a flirt pole, or that we had her staked out to.
The
But
flexi
outside of
pole.
that, I'm sorry, flexi pole. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that she was staked out to. She was a little bit worried about that in the beginning, but then was able to overcome it through the play and everything else. But that's actually a good point to bring up. We'll start wrapping it up, but one of the things I do want to touch on is what most trainers get away with 90% of the time, we'll say. We'll make up a statistic. And the technical term would be suppression or single event learning and stuff like that. And so one of the things that I think we get away with that is there's a theory that involves people, and it's called the region beta paradox theory. And so what it suggests is pretty much that people are more likely to take action on things that make them very uncomfortable vice something that's mildly discomforting. So like an analogy is, you'll walk to work if it's a mile or less. Typically you'll walk somewhere before you would consider driving, right? Anything past a mile you'll consider driving, because the walking more than a mile is just too much of discomfort. So you'll do something actionable towards getting to where your destination is. If we carry that over into dog training and reactivity, and specifically, and it's, in some ways it's sad, and if you know how to use it, it's appropriate, just like anything else. But like for dog reactivity, a lot of people will resort to straight punishment, and the dog will, that's essentially asking it to walk 2 miles. It's like, I would just rather avoid the punishment than whatever the reaction, or the stimulus that's producing the reaction.
Yeah.
But it still draws back to the same principles of what we said about positive reinforcement. If you're going to use that methodology, uh, it's not something that I would prescribe to immediately. It's more of a last resort situation. Depending on the severity, again, if the dog is mauling people, then yeah, it's probably going to be prioritized a little bit higher than a dog that's just barking at people. But the biggest thing is that whatever you use to punish the dog or try to suppress it, it has to exceed that motivation. And a lot of times the reason I don't prescribe to it or I don't go to it straight out the gate is because what that actually looks like is a lot more pressure and force than it's probably warranted. And there's just so many other avenues of approach that we could take to that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to wrap it up with your thoughts on that.
No, I'm right there with you on that one. I've definitely done it. There's times where you do come out the gate and you're like, hey, we're just going to suppress this. Maybe it's to get buy-in on some initial lessons, to get someone committed to it. Maybe it's a severe reaction that we just need to kind of stop then and there, and then we kind of work our way back. But it usually has some fallout. You can suppress a lot of stuff, but sometimes that behavior, that reaction, or another problem will kind of arise in a different area. You'll always kind of see some fallout from that. But I like to combine it with what we were talking about earlier. I do all the prerequisites of, hey, look at me first, or pay attention, or do this behavior. These things will get you rewarded. And then I'll layer some punishment in on the back end for advancing towards those things. Now there's some consequences for going towards other dogs or displaying certain kinds of reactions or doing certain things. I'll usually put that on the back end as opposed to starting with it. It's kind of like a proofing phase kind of thing. As we kind of get to that point, I'll correct the dog for a lot of those behaviors and then reinforce the correct behaviors. But I have 100% started out by suppressing some stuff before. Usually pretty extreme circumstances if I'm doing that, whether it's timeline or just the severity of the reaction. But there's just a lot of drawback with it. Usually you will see some fallout somewhere else. And the problem is how consistent you have to be with that correction.
You got me. Yeah, I was just literally thinking that I think that's probably one of the huger, just made up a word, but one of the bigger, that's how I know it's too late. We're up too late. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, that's one of the bigger drawbacks of using a suppression-based methodology, just off rip or initiating that without any other type of approaches to it, is that even if you're successful in the moment or for a period of time, you have to be consistent. Otherwise, it's going to resurface. Yeah. And when it does, good luck, man. It's going to resurface,
tenfold.
It's come back and it's rough. And I mean, I'm laughing and it's funny and it's not, but I've seen it where people think they're good and they get a little too complacent and that dog finds that little slither of hope and it says, all right, I'm going to do it.
And I can push through.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, in the working dog community, it's normally for outing and dogs coming off and going up leash for being corrected because they can't handle it or wasn't taught properly. And then you take people to the hospital and that's pretty much the end of that. But, and now we're working twice as hard for an undesirable behavior that we could have taken our time with and been done with it and had some longevity in. But yeah.
You start eliminating a lot of your tools at that point. Once the dog realizes you're not consistent or it can push through, now you got to escalate that pressure pretty quick. And that is not a fun game to be in because you run out of levels of escalation after a certain point. And once you do that, it's hell on wheels.
Yeah, 100%, man. Well, before we lose you again, hopefully I'll be able to blend this in, but we did have some technical difficulties probably about 10 minutes ago where I thought this whole episode was shot where we lost John. But if you don't have anything else to add about reactivity, I think that...
Yeah, I think that wraps it up.
We did a decent job.
Hopefully we explained it well. It's such one of those blanket terms. Like you can say a dog's reactive for pretty much everything. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint down. So hopefully what we said makes sense to a lot of people.
Yeah, so that's always my hope for every episode. I'm like, I started talking, I'm like, did that make sense? Or did that story even correlate with what we were trying to explain?
Yeah.
Who knows? Somebody will pick something out of it. Yeah, I think that wraps it up, man. I mean, I got to be up in a few hours. I have a lesson, another dog to train. And you have some dogs to train, right?
Yeah, he's been on the play scout this entire time, and then I'm about to work with Crash. I'll probably wait till tomorrow to work with Mona.
All right.
I still got to be up for 2 more hours, and then I can go to sleep. Not tired yet though, which is good.
Good for you. I'm dying. All right, so if people want to get in touch with you, John, how do they do that?
Jonathan Moses Canine on everything.
Okay. And then it'll be the same for me, except my name is not Jonathan, it is Sean. So it'll be Sean White, letter K number 9 on Instagram and YouTube and all that good stuff. And then for some reason, if you have suggestions, comments, concerns, or just want to talk shit to both of us at the same time, make sure we both see it. Follow our Instagram page, Working Dog and Whiskey, and then shoot us a message on there, and John and I can both read it at the same time.
Dude, real quick, do you see how Travis spelled my name in the group chat today?
Dude, he's been jacking our names up for quite some time.
Yeah, but I've never seen anybody spell Jonathan that wrong. Like, it blew my mind because, like, you'll get Jonathan, like Jonathon. I've even got, like, Jonothan. But, dog, JHOHNATHN was crazy. It's like, there's no way.
That is like, no, I was laughing because I was looking for the group text and I forgot he renamed it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. But that's a deep inside joke.
Yeah. But, yeah, no, there's only 3 people who should understand that joke.
That's for sure. Yeah, but we love Travis. He tries his best.
Yeah. Just can't spell names, apparently. It's like his kryptonite.
No, that and his memory.
Yeah, I thought it makes me feel better. Makes me feel better about my memory.
No, he's significantly older than you. So,
damn,
if anything, that's
it's like a predictor.
Yeah.
Fuck, that's not good.
No, it's not good. I'm sure they'll have some good medicine by then, or something AI related where you won't need it.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up some Ray-Ban Metas this upcoming Friday. Me and my brother are driving to Fayetteville. They got a store up there. I'll go ahead.
Speaking of stores and buying stuff for us.
Ooh, good segue. Yeah. There we go.
See, I'm getting better at it.
Hell yeah.
Here, why don't you tell them?
All right. So we got the website launched. It's workingdogsandwhiskey.com. We got decanters, we got mugs, we got hats. That's pretty much all we got right now. We got some other stuff that's going to be in the works, but yeah, it's getting there. We got our first order in today, which was kind of nice.
Nice.
And another one, I think we got 2 more coming in tomorrow.
So, oh, yeah, I think I might have somebody buying something. But anyways, the whole point is we don't make money off of doing this podcast. I'm sure everybody says that about their podcast, but it's actually true. We actually pay money into it, rather, now that we have the website. So go on there. It's in development, so it's not the final product just yet, but it is good enough where you can support the podcast and you can go in there and buy stuff.
Yep. Yeah, just help make the show better.
Yeah, make the show better. We can get some background stuff, some new mics, all types of things to make the show better. New computers or cameras, so it's a lot clearer. It's a lot of stuff we can do, but we need your support. And then if you don't want to pay to get our support, then support us by following us, giving us a 5-star review. You can always do that.
Yeah.
And then we're on Facebook too. We have a Facebook page where throughout the week we put out questionnaires and things and talk about dogs and what's going on in life.
Yeah. He says we, but he's been killing it on that. So go in there, get the conversation going.
Eventually it'll be us. But
yeah.
You got a lot going on. Dude, I'm just glad you're on the podcast.
I'll be scrolling through Facebook and I'm like, oh, this is good. I'm like, he's killing it. That's what's up. I see Working Dog and Whiskey post to the store. Like, I'll be scrolling. I'm like, oh, this is good. I'm like, I like that.
Nice. Yeah. We're doing something.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, support us. All right. Well, that'll do it for another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey. You guys have a great night. Train hard and pour slow.
Hell yeah. Oh, I like that. Was that AI?